So hello and welcome to our first What I Wish My Parents Knew forum of the 2021-2022 school year. My name is Shannon Strassner. I'm the program manager for Real Connections, a school-based resource center located at Canyon Hills. So once again, thanks for joining us. The What I Wish My Parents Knew forums are a collaborative effort between youth, community partners, and the San Diego Military Family Collaborative What I Wish My Parents Knew Action Team. That's a mouthful. This evening's forum is My Path Ahead and our return to campus. Our youth are play a crucial role in co-creating these forums so that they are timely, rich, and meaningful to our youth and families. Throughout the forum, we'll hear from youth about their experiences of transitioning back to in-person learning full-time. You'll also hear from Dr. Ben Strader about some of the impacts COVID has had on mental health and how parents and caregivers can support their teens through that. Later on in the forum, you'll have a chance to ask Dr. Strader and youth panelists questions, so be prepared for that. So we're going to get started by asking some of our youth in attendance something that surprised you about being back on campus. So I'll pass it over to Holly.
Hi, thank you, Ms. Shannon. So one thing that surprised me about being back on campus was I forgot how many people went to the school, because even though I went back into in-person school last year, only about half of the campus showed up. So when I came back this year for the first day of school, seeing the full amount of people that go to the school, walking through the hallways, I just hadn't been in a crowded hallway in a really long time, and I was starting to get nervous being around so many people. So that definitely took something getting used to. And I'll pass it on to Morgan.
Hi. For me, the biggest thing was how normal it felt. I mean, we've been online for about a year and a half, so going back to person, you'd think it'd be completely different. But honestly, the only things that were different are the mask mandates and frequently using hand sanitizer. But I mean, overall, I was just surprised at how natural everything felt and how I was used to the six period schedule. Sorry. I'm gonna pass it over to Sophia now.
Like Morgan and Holly said, I agree completely. I thought it was going to be a lot harder to just adapt to being around so many people in such a tight space sometimes. So it was honestly very easy, and it just took a couple days. And also the homework load, I thought it'd be a lot harder going from 3 classes to just having 6 hard classes. So that was definitely a lot easier, and it was better than I thought it would be.
Thank you all. I'm going to pass it over to Stacy now, and she's going to give us a little bit of background about how the forums sort of come to be.
Thank you, Shannon. My name is Stacy Childs. I'm also with Say San Diego. I work over with Shannon at Real Connections at Canyon Hills, and I have the pleasure of working with many of these youth leaders this evening. So before we hear from some of our youth leaders and dive into this topic of transitioning back to in-person life through the lens of young people, we want to provide everyone with some context on just how we come up with tonight's topic. For this specific forum, we surveyed high school students in August, and we asked them 3 questions related to their return back to campus. And so those questions were: what stressors and anxieties do you have about transitioning back to in-person school this fall? The second question was, what are you looking forward to this year? And then lastly, how can parents best support their student as they transition back to in-person school this fall? So the survey was unanimous, voluntary, and open-ended. So students were free to write anything as their response. And so once we received the student feedback, we shared this information with our student leaders, and together we drew common themes, which are woven into tonight's program, which you'll hear about later. So next up, you'll hear from our student leaders who really function as the voice of their peers, and they'll provide a summarized version of the survey feedback and share their experiences and perspective around each question. After we hear from all 3 youth, our subject matter expert will then weigh in. So let's get started. I'm now going to turn it back to Holly, and she's going to kind of give us an inside look of what students said when they answered that first question. Next slide. And Holly, feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Miss Stacy. So what stressors and anxiety do I have about transitioning back into school? The biggest worry that I had was that we were going to shut down again. I know that when we first started school again, I was hearing some stuff in the news about different districts that had to close down their schools because of COVID cases, and I really didn't want to have to go through distance learning again. Besides that, I was also worried about how when we were doing distance learning, our schedules were a lot more relaxed with only having 3 classes and not having to leave my house. So I was worried that I would have a hard time transitioning back into a 6-period schedule, being at school all day, and then balancing extracurriculars on top of that. But as far as that went, I ended up having an easier transition than I thought I would.
Holly, and I think by you sharing kind of your personal experiences and what the other students reported on the survey kind of indirectly normalizes a lot of students' feelings. And so that's always good for other students to hear that what they're feeling is normal. So thank you for sharing. And I will do a little side note. The little word clouds that you see on the slides, those are actual survey responses. So that's kind of some of the words that the students used when responding to the question. So now we're going to go to question number 2, and I will pass it to Sophia.
Hello, so for question 2, it was, what are you looking forward to this year? And a lot of the students described meeting new people, so seeing their friends, and then also being involved in school-related activities such as field trips, senior activities, or clubs and sports. And personally, for me, after being away for such a long time, I was really excited to just kind of be back around so many people and see my friends after such a long time, especially since I'm a very social person. So I like being around lots of people and being involved. And I also learn better a lot that way. So a lot of students also described how they would be able to learn better through it. And then also I really liked how by being back, we were also able to participate more directly within like our school clubs and our sports rather than being virtual the whole time. We were able to be more involved that way, which I think is really amazing.
Thank you, Sophia. And next up, we have Morgan. Morgan, do you want to share the last?
Yeah, hi again. So I guess the biggest thing about this question, which is how can parents best support their students as they transition back to in-person school this fall, is just understanding how the last year negatively impacted all of our students. I mean, that was a whole year and a half of students not having much social interaction. They were facing a challenging time where learning was very unique, but not in obviously a good way. And I think it's safe to say that cumulatively students were negatively impacted. So I think the first step about this question is that parents need to understand that. And they need to understand that transitioning back to in-person, you're taking on more classes, you're taking more of a responsibility. And parents just need to understand that it's a very odd transition. And admittedly, I had an easier time transitioning, but I know that everyone won't have that. So I think that's the first thing that parents need to understand. The second thing is mental health. A lot of students, I think myself included, our mental health was impacted because we were looking at a screen all day. Again, we didn't have much social interaction, so there's sort of an imbalance in like our lives. And I'd say that really messed up a lot of people's mentalities, and it really challenged them a lot. So a lot of student responses were saying that parents should be understanding, they should understand what their students are going through, they should talk to them, they should listen, they should be patient, they should encourage them, all sorts of that stuff. So communication is a really big thing that parents need to work on with their students, because again, transitioning from online on a screen to in-person where there's a lot of kids, social interactions are a bit harder now, and all the COVID mandates and stuff, parents really need to do a good job of communicating with their students and making sure that they're adjusting properly making sure that they're not feeling left out and making sure that they are just doing okay. So I think that's pretty much all that I have. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Holly, Sophia, and Morgan for sharing your experiences and for sharing the survey results from your peers. We would now like to transition into our next program segment. We are honored to have Dr. Ben Strader in attendance. Dr. Strader has been working in therapeutic, residential, recreational, and educational settings since 2002. He earned his doctorate degree in clinical psychology in 2014 from the Arizona School of Professional Psychology. He is currently employed with the United States Army as a licensed clinical psychologist and also has his own private practice. He is dedicated to helping service members and their families deal with the unique challenges that come with military life. And Dr. Strader has been happily married for 17 years and feels being a dad to his 4 children is one of his life's greatest accomplishments. Dr. Strader will be sharing strategies and tips for families to build open communication and tools to support their youth. So Dr. Strader, take it away.
Thank you, Sierra. I appreciate that. Lovely introduction. I did write it, so I mean, got to toot my own horn here. So thank you all for coming today and being willing to talk about this last few years. This last year or so has been really interesting, and I love the things that you all brought up in regards to mental health and how being in this time has been difficult. But I also loved hearing the resiliency that was stated by every single one of the youth that spoke about how there's enthusiasm, excitement, that you all were able to adapt and overcome. And that's really, in a lot of ways, the message that I'm seeing more and more in relation to what's happened since COVID-19 became since we entered into this time of a worldwide pandemic, is that this group of people, these young people, are just resilient as can be and have been able to adapt and overcome in many ways. But we do have to recognize the challenges and how we can overcome them. So I do have some slides, and I also am going to be talking with some notes. As we move into the information, I want you to know most of this information came from the CDC, from the National Institute of Mental Health, and from the Canadian, excuse me, the Canadian Association of Pediatrics. So all of this stuff is available online, and I've put my own kind of spin on it based on what I've seen in my own home, what I've seen in my practice with individuals that are kind of dealing with COVID. So I definitely want to talk a lot about that. So that is my name. I spelled it right, so good for me. And so really, I kind of wanted to just talk about how we stay mentally healthy during this time of COVID. And Morgan mentioned it, you know, all of these things have happened. Again, that enthusiasm, getting back into the swing of things. Sophia, I think you said that you're a very social person, which is really, really great, unless you don't get to be social, right? And then what happens if you're someone who's shy and has difficulty socially, and you're isolated for months and months, and then you have to go back into a social situation? It creates a lot of different difficulties based on who you are and how you face the world. But the important thing I want to talk about is the stage of development that you're in. So there's this doctor named Dr. Erickson. He came up with these developmental stages. And if you're in a child development class or psychology class or any of those classes that's going to talk about, or sociology class, they're going to talk about kind of the stages of how we develop as people. And one of the things he talks about is that each time in our life, we have kind of like these things that we have to balance, these things that are in many ways contradict each other, and we have to decide which way we roll on. And the stage of development when you're in your adolescent years or in your teenage years is a lot about being able to figure out who it is that we are, right? And so we call that the identity versus role confusion stage, right? And so this is our time for us to explore who we are. We know maybe who our caregivers are. We know what they're about. Do we like what they like? Are we what they're into? You know, or am I someone different? And it's this whole time of you finding your identity. And we find that in that stage through being with friends, through going to clubs, participating in athletics, listening to music. And so what happens when during that stage it's interrupted because of a worldwide pandemic, and it causes rifts, and that's really what we're facing for teenagers in your stages, right? So that's really what I want to speak to, understanding where we are developmentally, because this is your job. Literally, your job is to discover what it is that you're about, who you are, what you like, what you don't like. And I'm sure your caregivers know what it is you like and don't like, and hopefully you're telling them in nice ways, right? Okay, let's move on to the next slide. All right, so obviously there's going to be stress when we're talking about these types of things. If you're attached to social media at all, if you watch the news, or if you have the news on where you work, or even at school, you're probably getting a whole lot of information when it comes to COVID-19 and what's happening. And so one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing to manage our stress is understanding what's happening, what's being put out that's true and supported by science. So again, go back to the CDC website, National Institute of Mental Health, right? Go to those sources and find out that information of what's going on, and don't get into the weeds, right? Know what you need to know, and we don't need to do deep dives and all that other stuff like that, right? So there's things that we can do, and that's really what we're going to be talking about. The next slides are going to explain why I'm going so heavily on this, what we can do, right? Then we understand washing our hands, wearing a mask in public places, making sure if we're meeting with people, we can be in less public places. If you can research about vaccinations, you can research about medically what can be done to limit the spread of COVID-19, right? Social distancing, finding other ways. And this is where I've been so impressed with youth in this generation, is you guys have all found ways to stay friends and to engage and play games online and do cool stuff like that. So that's awesome. I think you all have done a great job with that, and I've been nothing but impressed. So how can we be social in a safe way? How can we do the things that we love? How can we find that identity that we're looking for, knowing who we are in a time when we might have some restrictions? One of the fears that was brought up was, if school starts, is it going to shut down again? That's a constant fear. And I know that I have a teenager right now who participates in athletics and in choir, and he's constantly watching and making sure that our numbers in the county are okay, so that school doesn't get shut down again, because he can't be on the teams, he can't be in the choir if schools are getting shut down again. So how do we find ways to be social? Those are the types of things that we want to look at. Making sure things are normal, keeping a schedule, finding ways to meditate, to use mindfulness. There's really great apps out there. There's groups online that you can do meditation and mindfulness groups. One of the questions that was in the material collected that was sent my way was questions about alcohol and drug use. Actually, according to the National Institute of Health, there's not been a huge increase in alcohol and drug use among teenagers statistically, right? Question then is, how honest are people being? Because if I was to ask anybody who was under the age of alcohol consumption, hey, are you drinking alcohol? You might not want to answer as truthfully as one might. So we always look at the numbers with some suspicion or in some form of caution, right? But they're saying that that's not a big increase. Although, if you look at adults that were polled by the Center for Disease Control, adults said there was an 18% increase in the amount that they're consuming alcohol, which can definitely affect everyone in the home. If your caregivers have increased their alcohol use consumption to deal with stress, that definitely can increase stress in the household, right? All right, so again, finding people that you trust, talking with people. It doesn't need to be a professional person unless you're dealing with very significant issues that need to be dealt with professionally, but just talking, being with people, right? And just recognizing that we are going to lose things, and we mourn the loss of those things. Hopefully, we've not been directly affected in terms of losing loved ones, but I know that there are many families that have lost loved ones, and so there can be a mourning process on top of that, as well as mourning the life that that we appreciated before. If you were on different teams and different groups, different athletic groups, organizations, key club, those types of things, we sometimes can mourn the loss of some of those things. One of the things I personally mourn the loss of, and again, this pales in comparison to anyone who's had significant losses, but just the not being able to attend live music events. That's something I really appreciate, and live sporting events, right? So we definitely are all kind of having to mourn the loss of what we don't have, right? So when we're looking at those things, how do we incorporate those things into our lives to be able to make sure we're still filling what's important? So some of the concerts that I had tickets for, we've watched on television, they've broadcasted them, they've done different things like that, and still continue to do so. So finding those ways to adapt. And I think, again, this is a very resilient generation. You all have probably way more ideas than this. I think my son pronounces it boomer, might be able to present, right? Did you guys get it? I said boomer, that's a dad joke. Okay, next slide. We'll move on. All right, so this is, right, so there was this doctor, right, that he was looking for kind of like what helps people, what indicates whether somebody is happy or somebody isn't happy, right? And this is kind of in the vein of what we call positive psychology, right? And so they started looking at what we call a locus of control, or a locus would be like your area of control. And they found that people who have an internal locus of control versus an external locus of control are actually more resilient, and they can actually handle things that are difficult better in terms of being able to address concerns, in terms of being able to keep moving when things are difficult, right? So here's a picture of what locus of control kind of talks about, right? An internal locus of control essentially says, I have the ability to make changes, to control, to do what I can within my world. Whereas an external locus of control says the world controls me. I wonder if y'all can kind of think of how that might be problematic to have an external locus of control. Maybe we can discuss it during the discussion section if people have questions. You want to move to the next slide? All right, so this is that internal locus of control versus that external locus of control. And there's a fox in here. So if you spotted that, good job. All right, but so the internal locus of control is within that circle, right? These are the things that we can do to manage stress when we're dealing with difficult things that are kind of bombarding us, right? Keeping a positive attitude, focusing on things that are going to bring us good emotions, good feelings, making sure you have a social network connected, no matter if you're able to see it physically or if you're doing it over virtual, right? Making sure we're following recommendations to keep us safe and our loved ones safe, right? Those are things that we can do. Finding things that we enjoy in the new setting. This says specifically at home, but again, like I mentioned, if I like live music, how do I engage in that in a way that is safe but still within my control? And in that external locus of control, we can have these thoughts. These are just normal thoughts to have. But what are we focusing on? If we can focus in on that inner circle, that's going to give us the ability to have more resiliency. All right, you want to go to the next one, please? All right. So this is my favorite picture because this is literally what my son looks like when I start talking. That zoned out expression on his eyes, they just kind of glaze over, and he even does this, yeah, so I love this picture, but I wanted to kind of give some tips to what parents can do. And y'all, there is a really great, a lot of this comes from, again, from the Center for Disease Control. The CDC website has a really great toolkit for parents that actually breaks it down by age, ways in which you can do things you can do in order to like help educate your kids on what's going on, what's kind of the healthy information. Like talking to your 16-year-old is going to be very different than talking to your 6-year-old. What information should we be talking to them about? How can we make sure their life reflects more effective and healthy norms, right? So really, I think the key takeaway is, and I saw that in the word bubbles that were on the presentations, is, are we listening? Are we letting them talk? Are we communicating with them about what we need? If we're stressed, it's your teenagers are smart and they know, right? And if you're not talking about it, about what's stressing you, it can be invalidating what's stressing them. But if you say to them, man, I'm really having a difficulty with, being socially isolated, or the changes at my job, or unemployment, or new employment, or these types of things, these are great things to have discussions about with your teenagers, because they're smart and they're picking up on it anyway. I believe that a teenager can spot a fake from a mile away. If you're fake and you're pretending something's not wrong, and they know, right? And then be patient. We all need to be patient. So encouraging them to celebrate milestones in the new environment, that's really important. Each family group, culture, regional area, there's all these different milestones that we reach at certain ages or at certain developmental stages, right? And these can be upset many times by the pandemic, by COVID. And so how do we make sure that we celebrate those things and have celebrations, create good memories? Those are things that we can do to help our teenagers, right? Any emotion is okay. And even if they're experiencing anxiety and depression, just understanding those are normative things. And we have seen an increase in anxiety and depression among teenagers, as well as suicidal ideation. So understanding this is a normal process and knowing when and where to go get help. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I know my time is up here, so I need to go quickly. All right.
Dr. Streeter, just to let you know, we do have a little bit of time. So if you need to take a couple beats, we are ahead of schedule.
That's right. I knew that. I was just seeing if you knew that, Shannon. Thank you. Awesome. Okay. So how to talk to your teenager about COVID. This is really important. Again, I feel like your teenagers probably know a lot more than they let on about what's going on with COVID. They definitely understand what it feels like for them in their life. So I would make sure you're listening a lot more and noticing what, and trying to help them express what it is they need from you, right? And noticing what's going on in their life. So make sure you're asking them questions. Again, my son, his favorite thing is for me to ask him questions. That's a lie. That's a total lie. In fact, I asked him how tennis practice went today. This is a literal direct quote. He said, tennis. That's it. I said, how did tennis practice go today? And he dropped his racket and he said, tennis. So that is the communication. I know Sophia, she knows how to communicate, right? Like that's the communication that I get from my son, right? So, but when he wants to talk, I need to make sure that I'm ready to listen and right. Now, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Again, if you're getting your information from social media, if you're getting your information even from news outlets and things of that nature, understand everything has a spin on it, right? So make sure that you're helping our youth understand what the correct information is, right? In an age appropriate way. Again, 6 versus 16, I'm going to talk to them very different. The details are not important as much as how the outcomes are in our life, right? And then just validating. That whole process of validating is like, Can you imagine what it would be like when you were 14, 15 years old and to have your life interrupted in the way that your teenager has? And I would love to hear the discussions if you've had that conversation with your parents, or parents if you've had that conversation with your teenagers in regarding to like what would it have been like you for us, right? I don't want to divulge my age, but I am very familiar with NSYNC, so that might be a clue. But and MC Hammer, right? But what would have happened in that time, in that era, if I would have been cut off from the things that really I identified with and made me have ways to associate with people and find self-confidence and those types of things like that, right? And then one of the things we need to do as well is make sure that we're limiting the amount of media exposure, limiting the amount of exposure to all that stuff, because we have to remember that a lot of those ways in which we get that information, they're trying to compete for our eyes, right? So they're going to sensationalize, they're going to repeat stories, they're going to do this thing. So there's a 24-hour news cycle. So they have constant things to zip to my phone so that I look and that they can get paid in advertising. That sounds, it sounds kind of crazy, but that's really the world, right? So they want to sensationalize a lot of those things. And what we need to do is make sure we're getting the correct information, not only for ourselves, but down to our children, right? All right, next slide. Okay, this one made me laugh, so I had to put it in there. Okay, now, what happens when I feel anxious, right? And y'all, if there is a pandemic, you should probably feel a little bit anxious. That's adaptive, right? If there's a pandemic out there and I'm like, meh, no big deal, I got this, I'll just go out and do whatever, probably not the safest behavior to have in the middle of a pandemic, right? So recognizing that, like, okay, some of these thoughts of anxiousness are helpful and some of them aren't. So if my thought of anxiousness is, man, I'm kind of worried about what might happen, I will make sure I socially distance. That is an adaptive behavior that's going to help me be safe, right? If my thought is anxious, like was mentioned before, like, man, I don't know how comfortable I feel in large crowds of people, then by all means, please make sure that you're being smart about that. But there comes a point in time when we have diminishing returns, right? And those anxiety thoughts become too problematic, and maybe we're isolating ourselves too much, or we're keeping ourselves away from things that might be safe and helpful for us, right? So that's what we want to look at, and we want to help ourselves and our teens understand that we have to kind of, just because the thought pops into our head, we can't just believe it wholeheartedly. We have to kind of look at it, take it out, examine it, and see if it's helpful or not, right? And then recognizing how maybe the thoughts that we have, or if we're listening to the news, right, or doing some of these things like that, we might be over emphasizing what might happen, and it might not be an actually very realistic expression of that. So then we can talk to doctors, we can talk to friends, we can talk to teachers and administrators at our school to know maybe what the advice is from professionals, right, in regards to that. And then we really just want to guide ourselves, and I say ourselves because I know teenagers aren't the only anxious ones. In fact, there might be some teenagers in here that feel fine with it and have figured it out, but their parents are more anxious, or their caregivers are more anxious, right? So this process is something we have the opportunity to do quite a bit, is to recognize, are thoughts helping us? Is it helping me manage? Is it helping me manage my life, right? And is it helping me manage my life in a healthy and adaptive way? All right, next slide. All right, and then when life goes back to normal, right? And I feel like this is kind of this dynamic of, ooh, it's kind of back to normal. Will they take it away, right? This is the new normal, right? The new normal. We understand now how to do Zoom meetings. We understand. I know that meetings at my work have shifted greatly. There are providers in my clinic who do not come into the clinic anymore. They are full-time at-home providers because of some medical conditions and things of that nature, right? So we have learned to adapt to this new normal, and your teenagers might be better at it than you are. So so being able to work as a team together to understand how the new normal is going to look is going to be really good. So the key then is that very bottom thing. How do you all, you as the parent, you as the teenager, how do you feel safe and supported? And that's really the key. And then we can work our way backwards from that. What is it that you need to feel safe and supported from your parent, caregiver? What is it that you need to be safe and supported from your teen, and to know that your teenager is going to be safe and supported, right? And that's the dynamic. That's what we should be talking about when we talk about the new normal as we move forward. So understanding setbacks will occur. This is not a linear process, which means going from one end to the other in a nice, straight, beautiful line. It's going to look like a lot of squigglies all over the place. We're going to be up and down and all over the place. So recognizing that in the new normal, there is no normal. So that's kind of my thoughts in regards to that. I think that's my last slide. And then, of course, if there is a crisis, if you do need support, please reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out to a professional. Anxiety, depression are normative, adaptive experiences in the human condition. They can also be very problematic. If you're having thoughts of killing yourself, if you're having super depressive thoughts, if you can't function in your life because of anxiety, please, please, please reach out for help. There is nothing wrong with that. We also need to recognize that in our homes where we're not out at school and things like that, sometimes bad things can happen. And so know that you are not alone and that there's all sorts of resources for parents and teens. And if there's any questions in regards to that, we can talk about that later. But that is kind of my thoughts in regards to that. And thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben, for sharing all the valuable information. Something that really resonated with me was all of the advice about setting boundaries, whether that's with yourself, with everything around you, things that you're consuming. I think that was really valuable because both all of those things were definitely sources of stress and still continue to be sources of stress. So that was something I wanted to point out. And now we're going to transition into our final segment of the evening, and that's our panel where we'll hear some more from our youth leaders, along with Dr. Schrader. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. I'm going to turn it over to our panel moderator, Mrs. Jennifer Gibbons, who is from the Military Child Education Coalition.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. This has been so interesting. And Dr. Ben, I have a question for you because we talked about how, and this is something, my kids, I've got 4 daughters. My youngest just went back to UC, University of California, Riverside, back on campus. And so she's kind of living this right now that you guys are all as well. And it is anxiety ridden, you know, what it's going to look like. And a couple of you guys mentioned, and it was definitely in the cloud word bubble cloud, whatever that's called, about what if we all get shut down again? And what is that going to look like? And how disappointing and how devastating that could feel. But talking about alcohol and drug abuse, I see it in my own peers that our drinking is way up. And you mentioned that because I think the kids don't have the social life that, you know, you and I, Dr. Ben, had when we were young, you know, the keggers on the beach and whatever. How would you suggest a teenager who sees this happening in their home, that maybe mom and dad are imbibing a little too much because nobody's going anywhere, nobody drives anymore, you know, you're cracking one a little early. How can the kids address this and how it's affecting their and maybe increasing their stressors in their life?
That's a really great question. So anytime that there's like a system, right? If one thing changes in a system, everything else has to kind of adapt based on that system, right? So even if, you know, mom or dad or grandma or grandpa, whoever your caregivers are not going to work and live in life in sweatpants with a glass of wine, things shift and change, right? So anytime we're looking at like behavior, right? We look at behavior and we say, this is adaptive behavior. So if, if I start, if I have a few extra fears or whatnot, and I'm still able to function, and I'm still able to provide for my family, and I'm still able to provide for, a safe environment, right? And I'm not aggressive or abusive or those types of things like that, it might not be considered disordered, right? It might just be something that I'm engaging in that's not necessarily a problem, right? But again, teenagers can spot a fake. Teenagers are clued in. You guys are smart, right? If that problem becomes disordered, which is our word in psychology, right? As psychologists, when we say this is no longer working, right? It doesn't work anymore. If that comes disordered, that's when you need to get people involved that can assist in that process. And I'm not saying they need to go see a psychologist or a therapist, but maybe that is the answer. But there's all sorts of resources available for individuals that might be dealing with someone who maybe has some addictive behavior. There's Al-Anon, which is actually an open group that is for family members of people who maybe have an unhealthy relationship to alcohol and drugs, right? And so there's those types of organizations that you can reach out to for your own learning, right? And then if it ever comes to a situation where you are not getting care or you are not feeling safe, you definitely need to reach out to an organization that can help out. And it might be a trusted adult. It might be someone at your school. It might be a therapist or a psychologist, right? And if, of course, if it's ever a safety issue, that's when you're going to call those hotlines, right? That I had in that run. There's abuse hotlines. There's all of these types of things like that. There's helplines and crisis lines. Each county usually has a help or a crisis line for mental health or addiction related issues. There's all sorts of resources available to individuals that need to seek that information. Does that answer your question?
That's perfect. Exactly. And everyone online, 211. If you don't know who to call or where to start, 211 will, a human being on the other line will direct you, and Miss Shannon, Miss Stacy, they'll have all kinds of resources as well. So sometimes just drawing attention, hey, mom, dad, caring adult in my life, it's 4:30, or whatever. And just kind of drawing attention. Sometimes that's all the adult needs to, like, oh yeah, I gotta be a role model. Dr. Ben.
Yes.
In the news lately, there's been a lot of celebrities talking about mental health issues coming back from their celebratory life. And there's a lot of tennis players and professional athletes pulling back because of mental health issues. I applaud this. I think it's fabulous. Looking at all of that, do you think the pandemic has changed how we're viewing mental health? I think on the surface, this is positive. What are your thoughts on that, and what can we take and learn from those kind of in the spotlight people?
That's a really great question. I think the best thing about that is it normalizes it, right? So we have this idea that mental health is for broken people or for people who aren't successful, that people who experience depression don't get out of bed, and they, and those are actually true, right? Like that, there are people who have significant depression, but we also understand that there's a high percentage of people in their lifetime that might meet the criteria for depression. Mm-hmm. Right. And so the thing that I think is great about that is normalizing the idea that we have these issues. One of my favorite people to follow online is a celebrity who's come out and has been accomplished across a number of different areas. And I love to see what they're putting out in regards to times that they've struggled with mental health issues and still continue to struggle with mental health issues, right? So understanding that there are very successful people who have dealt with significant struggles. There are very successful people who have and are currently dealing with mental health issues is super, super, I think, important for us to understand that this is the human condition. Like I said, you don't have a worldwide pandemic without having some nervousness and anxiety about it. we call it disordered. Again, we'll use that word disordered when I can't function because of it. But most of us have it. And again, that's a healthy adaptive behavior to go, maybe I should take precautions, right?
Right.
So I think it's really great. And I do think it has put a spotlight on it because we've had to look at it and recognize that it's normal in an abnormal situation.
I exactly agree. And the ability and the strength it takes, the strength of character to remove yourself from a public, situation because you're disordered, you're not handling it well. I think that normalized, that's fabulous. So something I'm going to ask Dr. Ben, Nick, and Sophia, so get your thinking caps on. The behaviors that we've seen, these changes, just a quick story. So I have a nephew who is high functioning. He's on the autism scale. He thrived with remote learning. He loved it. He loved everything about it. And now he has to go back and he's devastated. So he's a little bit of an opposite situation. What behaviors have you found as a society or as a people that we've kind of learned being at home for this last 18 months that we would like to maybe take with us forward? And what are some good things that's come from this pandemic? So we'll start with Ben and then Sophia and then Nick.
Hey, well, I'll tell you what, I think this pandemic has highlighted the fact that there is no reason that people have to stay in a traditional learning environment. What was considered non-traditional learning environments before, online, some of those types of things like that work for some people who have, maybe some social anxiety or some being on the spectrum or some of those types of things. Can work really great. I have one of my children is more shy than the other three and flourished in online school and loved it. And anyway, we have to understand, I think now more than ever, our society has realized that we're all different. Every single one of us is different, and we're going to flourish and function in different environments. And so this pandemic has opened up, I think, a world of options that might not have existed before, not only for education, but like I said, for healthcare, for being able to attend concerts, for travel, for being able to stay in contact with people and have meetings like this right now. Like I'm in Washington State, and it's like you can hear my angelic voice in your computer now. You're welcome. And I think it's really brought that to light. I'd love to hear what the other panelists have to say about that.
Yeah, Sophia, what would you like to see that we take forward into the world?
Well, speaking from personal experience, I agree that during this time, we've also been able to really find ourselves more and find what works best for us. So people have noticed that, I like working on the internet and being virtually more, while others have really understood that being in social areas is what makes them work better and learn better. So I think this has allowed us to kind of figure ourselves out a bit more and figure out how we can thrive. And also for me, being in the pandemic and being alone every day and virtual, I found that doing things that I'm really passionate about and doing activities and taking time away just to focus on myself was also really important. So I've also learned that even now, while I'm going back to school, I need to take time out of my day or my week to really focus on stuff that isn't school or isn't kind of work stuff, but more stuff that just kind of fulfills me and makes me a better, happier person.
That is excellent. That's exactly right. I think because you it's forced isolation a little bit, you spend more time kind of exploring your own brain and your own, what makes you happy. I think you're exactly right, Sophia. Okay, Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I think another thing that goes along with self-isolation, especially in relation to distance learning, is being self-motivated, especially in the earlier part of distance learning when there weren't a lot of things that counted. We had to kind of motivate ourselves to do the work. This teachers couldn't come over and look over our shoulders at what we were doing. We just kind of had to go with the flow. And I definitely think I learned to be more self-motivated, learn to structure my time, learn to find something to do. Like, I don't think the words "I'm bored" I will ever say those again. It just doesn't apply anymore. It's
That's
not worth
exactly
it.
right.
I've learned that it's not worth it to be bored. So so I just finding ways to structure our time and to help ourselves do more with what we want to do. And then, like Sophia said, finding our passions and going with them, and just learning what works for us and how we can help ourselves be more productive and do better, whether it's in school or outside of school, and or in work, in various types of work, or many different things, just to help ourselves keep going regardless of outside stimulus.
Of what's happening in the world. Exactly right. Thank you, Nick. I got another one for you, Nick. Do you feel that the experiences you guys are having and the challenges that you're experiencing, do you feel like your caring adults in your life are hearing you, and like, I hate to say taking you seriously, but you know, because the adults in your life also have all these stressors and kind of have, you know, pandemic stressors. Do you feel like you're being heard, or are you feeling like you're being minimized? And if you are, do you think there are challenges that you guys are not sharing, or you haven't maybe verbalized, don't know how to verbalize?
No, I definitely think I think we are being heard when we do speak, but we don't speak about a lot of things, whether it's because of our busy schedules, everyone having their own problems and just keeping them inside. I think some of the things that like go along with coming back to in-person school is like physical health, physical wellness, whether it's simple things like being able to eat before you get to school and having limited time to eat during school, packing food, and then getting enough water during school, staying hydrated, basic things like that. This physical fatigue, having to go to school and then do homework at night after not being used to like going from class to class to class.
Exactly.
all day long, and then mental wellness that goes along with that, not having having short breaks between classes to try to get your head together, go to another class, and then having to come home and motivate yourself again, having to be self-motivated in the midst of having this new environment that you're trying to immerse yourself back into. So I think basic like wellness things, trying to adapt to that, making sure that we're taking care of our mental health while we have a full day of school, when we would normally have a lot longer breaks during distance learning.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that, Nick. That's exactly right. Because you're drinking water, you can't take your mask off. You're supposed to eat without, while you all have to be safe. I didn't even think of that. The physicality of being back on campus. I didn't even think of that. See, this is why you have to communicate with us dummy old people. All right, Sophia, what would you like your school or community to do to support the youth, you guys, in this post-COVID life? What are they doing to support, and what would you like to see happen?
I think something that I'd like, especially our parents and school, either teachers or counselors and principals, to understand that the pandemic was really hard on us specifically because we had to completely change everything. And with school, you have to keep adding on. So if you're behind, especially in high school, it really causes a lot of damage, especially if you're trying to like aim for good colleges, you can get really lost. So I think them understanding what it took a toll on us, and then also understanding that we're under a lot of pressure. We, as like teenagers, we go through a lot. We have to find work sometimes we have family issues that we're trying to deal with. We have to think about our future. That's all kind of pushing us down. So I think if teachers understand more, and parents, like the pressure we're under, and they try to be there to help us, that'd be really great for everyone. And then I also think that parents just like also really validating their children, and like saying, oh, great job on your accomplishments, you did great going to school today, even if it's little small things, everything helps. And just having that positive reinforcement for students to like have in their head to say, oh, I'm doing great today, like this was the success. I think that's something that's very helpful, and that parents and teachers should really try to do, because even those little small things can really push students to like move forward and really motivate themselves.
That's exactly right. Sometimes it's all you need to hear, right? Is one little kind word or one little attaboy, and it gives you that little bit of energy to keep going. That's exactly right. You guys are awesome. Those are all my questions. Anybody have any questions?
Oh, can I make a comment in relation to
Yes.
what Sophia was saying? And as well, I think it kind of goes with Nick's statement. Like, again, you all are so resilient, but we as adults need to realize that, like, even though you all have, mentally, physically, right, all have this, makeup to be intelligent and functional and all these other things like that, we forget as adults that you all don't have the same level of control in your life that we do.
Mhm.
And so you're dealing with the same challenges, and in like Sophia mentioned, in many ways more challenges, and you don't have the ability to control and to make the decisions and to do those things just because on your ID or whatever it says a different age. So we as adults have to recognize that you all are smart, intelligent, functional, healthy, right, and resilient. And then we also need to recognize that we are not only just your caregivers, but we're also your advocates and your allies. And I think that that's one thing as parents, as caregivers, right, is that we are your advocates and allies, and that you have the ability to lead us, to help us to know how we can best benefit you all. So I hope if anyone walks away from anything with this, is that we have great communication between you all and those caregivers, because that's who can be your backup and your support. That's all.
Thank you, guys.
Well, I can hop in and help bring us home, as they say. So obviously the panel, we appreciate your time, efforts in informing, obviously, something that's being felt worldwide. And we don't want to discredit any difficult situation out there. But I mean, a lot of the things that are shared today are universal. So the call to action is always to allow our youth to be able to share in front of parents, which is why it's called What I Wish My Parents Knew, to have parents have that understanding and realization, but also for youth to feel like you have the floor and that adults will take notice. So please continue to exercise your voice. You will see in the chat, for those who are joining us today, we would love to know about your experience with us and how you may have gotten some nuggets of wisdom or information that would allow us to continue working on serving you to meet your best needs. And with regard to today, we actually had an opportunity to have an opportunity drawing. And with the help of Winter, I should have got queued up a drum roll, but with the drum roll, our winner today are the Turners. So you will be contacted for, I believe, a gift card, and you are a wonderful winner for today's opportunity drawing. So it pays to show up. Not to say that, if you're joining us at a later recorded version, it didn't matter. It does matter. And we're glad to have you. But we would love to see you live with us in the future to ask, obviously, the questions that you want to get answers to. So where do we go from here? Once again, please, if you're with us tonight, please fill out the form with regard to the resources that have been kind of showcased, especially the presentation from Dr. Ben Strader. We're going to be sharing that out as a PowerPoint for all of those who are in attendance. And if you're joining us from a recorded version, you're welcome to contact us. We'll leave our information as we post that video at a later point in time, probably on our YouTube channel. And we want you to mark your calendars for the next forum, which will be occurring in November. And for those who are able to tune in and provide your own suggestions, we do want to know kind of what's on your mind in terms of what are some topics that you feel like we could be intersecting on. So on behalf of the What I Wish My Parents Knew staff team, the youth, our wonderful expert panelist, Dr. Ben Strader, thank you for joining us this evening. We hope you have a wonderful evening. And as always, take care.